Can you imagine your own mother-in-law handing you divorce papers as a birthday gift in front of your entire family? While your husband records your reaction for their laughs. That's exactly what happened to me on my 31st birthday. But what Athena never expected was the revenge I had already set in motion. Please stay with me as I tell you my story of betrayal and the ultimate comeback. And please, do not forget to support our channel by subscribing, liking, and sharing with your loved ones. 3 days before the party, I woke up early for my shift at Bella Sera. The house was quiet, and I padded down the stairs still half asleep. The kitchen light over the island was on, casting a pale glow. There she was, Athena, my mother-in-law, sitting like a queen at her throne, reading glasses perched low on her nose. She wasn't drinking coffee or flipping through a magazine. No, she was carefully reviewing a neat stack of documents, page by page, with the kind of satisfaction that made my stomach tighten. When she noticed me standing there, she jumped slightly, though her smile came quickly, practiced, and cold. In one smooth move, she slid the papers into a gold-embossed envelope, the kind you'd expect for an anniversary card or maybe even a wedding invitation. "Just some family paperwork for Caspian, dear," she said, her voice sugar-coated but hollow. I didn't think much of it at the time. In fact, I even felt a flicker of hope. Maybe it was a property deed. Maybe she was finally planning to hand something down, a piece of security, or, ridiculous as it sounds, maybe she was preparing some form of trust to bring me closer into the family fold. I was always hoping for that, though I should have known better by then. For 2 years, Athena had made it clear I would never measure up. Still, I remember the envelope vividly, the way she tucked it into her bag with that glimmer in her eyes. Not the glimmer of kindness, but of strategy. And I left for work that morning trying to shake off a gnawing unease. I told myself I was being paranoid. But that feeling stayed with me, echoing in the back of my mind. Looking back now, I realized she had already scripted my humiliation. Every detail was choreographed. The fancy restaurant, the cake, the camera waiting to capture my tears, the envelope waiting to be opened by me in front of everyone. She wanted to destroy me not just privately, but publicly, in a way that would strip me of my dignity. And she would have succeeded if not for the fact that I had already made my own secret move. What Athena didn't know was that only days before, I had signed a contract that would change my life forever. She thought she was leading me to my end, but in reality, she was setting the stage for my beginning. When I replay that morning in my head, I don't see a woman handling paperwork. I see a trap being baited. And I walked straight into it, calm, smiling, and ready. Because what she thought was her weapon turned out to be mine. For almost 2 years, Athena found small but cutting ways to remind me that I didn't belong. She never raised her voice or directly insulted me. Instead, she chipped away at me little by little, with a smile on her face and a tone that seemed sweet to anyone who wasn't listening closely. That was her power, making her cruelty sound like concern. One evening at Caspian's cousin's wedding, she pulled me into a circle of her wealthy friends. With a glass of champagne in her hand, she said, "This is my son's wife. She works in the service industry." The pause she took between those words was louder than the music. They nodded politely, but their polite smiles turned sharp the moment they glanced at me. I felt myself shrink, though I pretended not to care. Athena beamed like she had just scored a victory. Moments like that became normal. Every holiday exposed another way she drew lines between their family and me. On Christmas morning, Daphne tore open a velvet box with a designer bag inside. When it was my turn, I unwrapped a heavy book titled Finding Your Career Path. "I thought it might inspire you," Athena said sweetly, her eyes never leaving my face. Caspian chuckled nervously, then leaned over to help Daphne admire her gift. I sat there holding my present, the room spinning, knowing everyone understood what it meant. At dinners, she often asked questions that sounded casual but cut like knives. "How's the restaurant? Do they still keep you on those long late-night shifts?" Or she'd comment about how tired I looked, as if my job wasn't respectable but something shameful I should escape. Caspian once defended me, but that stopped quickly. Over time, his silence grew. If I tried to talk about my work at Bella Sera, he changed the subject or checked his phone. The man who once admired my independence now avoided even mentioning my efforts. Athena was clever in her cruelty. She never attacked in ways that could be called out. Instead, she staged situations where I was the odd one out. At family events, she'd pour wine for everyone, but leave my glass empty until I asked. She'd plan trips without including me, later claiming she thought I'd be too busy. She treated me like a guest in my own marriage, and Caspian went along with it because it was easier than standing up to her. Even when she pretended to be generous, there was always a hook. She once invited me to a charity gala, insisting it would be good exposure for me. I wore my best dress, but when we arrived, she whispered, "Next time, try something more refined." The rest of the night, she paraded Daphne around while introducing me with faint praise, as though I were a temporary addition that wouldn't last. Those constant reminders wore me down. I began second-guessing everything: what I wore, how I spoke, even how I laughed. I found myself trying to impress her, hoping for one sign of approval, though deep down I knew it would never come. She thrived on reminding me that I didn't measure up. And the worst part was Caspian letting it happen, until I stopped seeing him as my partner and started seeing him as her shadow. By then, I realized that no matter what I did, I would never be good enough for Athena. She had already decided I didn't deserve a place at their table, and her mission was to make sure I believed it too. What she never saw, though, was that her relentless campaign wasn't breaking me. It was slowly giving me the strength to walk away from her control. The day I stopped trying to please them felt like a relief I hadn't known I needed. Something inside shifted. I stopped rehearsing apologies and stopped answering when my mother-in-law aimed thin compliments that were really barbs. Instead of begging for approval, I began making a quiet plan for myself. I didn't tell anyone. I couldn't risk my hopes being laughed at or dismissed. I started small and steady. Nights after my shift at the restaurant became my study time. I read job listings, learned how to write a proper resume, and practiced answers to interview questions in front of the bathroom mirror. I saved every extra dollar. No more buying treats or new outfits unless they were for interviews. I canceled monthly subscriptions and packed lunches. Money that used to slip away on small comforts went straight into a folder labeled future. The folder sat under my bed like a secret promise. Work at Bella Sera taught me skills I hadn't valued before. Keeping cool when customers were rude, solving problems fast, and making people feel welcome even when I was tired. I began to treat those skills as real experience. I rewrote my resume to show what I could do, not where I'd worked. I wrote clear examples of handling difficult guests, organizing busy nights, and training new staff. Each bullet point made me feel more real, more employable. I made careful choices about where to apply. I avoided places that required degrees I didn't have and aimed for roles where customer care mattered. I filled online forms late at night when the house was quiet. I reached out to anyone who might help: an old classmate, a neighbor who managed a boutique, even the manager of a small hotel I once visited. Most people didn't answer, or they sent polite rejections. Each no stung, but I kept moving. My confidence grew in tiny steps. I practiced interview conversations with Mr. Rossi at Bella Sera during slow hours. He noticed my determination and gave honest feedback. Speak slowly, tell one clear story about solving a problem, and smile less nervously. He introduced me to a contact who managed events at a downtown venue. That introduction led to a short freelance job helping organize a wedding reception. It wasn't glamorous, but I listed it on my resume. It showed I could handle logistics and high-pressure events. There were nights I wanted to give up. Rejection emails started to feel personal. Caspian thought I was chasing a dream that would never pay off. He didn't hide his irritation when I turned down a weekend away to keep working on applications. The tension at home tightened my chest, but it also pushed me forward. I could either stay where I was quiet, shrinking, or make the slow climb toward independence. I signed up for an online short course in hospitality management. It cost less than a month's groceries, but it taught me industry terms and gave me a certificate I could mention in interviews. I practiced answering behavioral questions until I could do it without stumbling. I learned to turn a lack of formal education into proof of my grit and practical ability. After weeks of quiet effort, a small victory arrived. A phone call asking me to come in for an in-person interview. I felt a nervous, electric mix of fear and hope. I dressed carefully, arrived early, and repeated the stories I'd prepared. I focused on concrete examples, on what I had fixed, changed, or improved. The interviewer listened. For the first time in a long while, I left an interview not feeling defeated. That day taught me the power of steady work and secrecy. I had built something without fanfare, skills, experience, and a plan. I no longer needed their validation. I had created my own path, piece by piece, with quiet determination and practical steps. What began as a small, private pursuit was becoming a life I could walk into with my chin up. The call came when I least expected it. I was folding laundry on a quiet afternoon, the kind of chore that numbs your thoughts. My phone buzzed, and the number was unfamiliar. Normally, I wouldn't answer, but something urged me to pick up. A calm, professional voice introduced himself as Mr. Sterling from Grandeur Hotel and Resorts. My heart skipped. I almost didn't believe what I was hearing when he explained he had reviewed my application for guest relations manager. I had nearly forgotten I'd even sent it. Months had passed without a reply, and I assumed it had been tossed aside like so many others. Mr. Sterling's tone was confident, not the patronizing kind I had grown used to during interviews where managers questioned if restaurant work counted as real experience. Instead, he spoke as though my years at Bella Sera were proof of exactly what his team needed. He described how the hotel valued people who could handle pressure, make guests feel important, and fix problems before they grew. Every sentence felt like a door swinging open that I had been pushing against for years. He asked a few questions, but it didn't feel like an interrogation. He wanted real examples, and I gave them easily, handling a large party with no reservations, calming a furious guest after a mix-up, training new servers during the holiday rush. He listened closely, even laughed when I told a story about a champagne bottle exploding in the middle of a wedding dinner. For the first time, I felt like my work wasn't something to hide or excuse. It was something valuable. Then came the part one will never forget. He said he wanted to extend an offer right away. My hand started to shake so much I had to sit down. The package he described didn't sound real. A salary of $55,000, health insurance, paid vacation, and even a bonus for signing. But the detail that struck me the most was the housing. An employee apartment at the resort itself, 3 hours away from the life that had been suffocating me. It felt like freedom wrapped in one phone call. I tried to stay composed, but my voice trembled as I thanked him. He told me I had a week to decide, though he hoped my answer would be yes. The moment the call ended, I sat in silence, clutching the phone to my chest. My heart was racing, but tears slipped down my face. Not tears of sadness this time. Tears of pure relief. For days, I carried the secret like a flame inside me. I went about my routines, washing dishes, serving tables, smiling at customers, all while knowing my escape was no longer a fantasy. Every time Athena sneered or Caspian sighed at my supposed lack of ambition, I bit my tongue and held back a smile. They had no idea I was already halfway out the door. At night, I read everything I could about Grandeur Hotel. I looked at photos of the resort, the glowing chandeliers, the pristine suites, the ocean view stretching beyond the lobby windows. It wasn't just a job, it was a whole new world waiting for me. I imagined myself walking through that lobby with a name badge that said manager. The thought gave me strength I didn't know I still had. When I printed the offer letter and tucked it into a folder, I felt the weight of proof in my hands. It was more than paper, it was a new beginning. I didn't share it with Caspian, didn't hint at it to anyone. This was mine alone, my key to a life where I would no longer be dismissed or belittled. That unexpected call turned everything around. It wasn't just a job offer. It was my chance to step into independence, to leave behind the shadows that had been choking me, and to finally walk toward a future I had built on my own terms. When the letter arrived in my hands, I couldn't stop staring at it. The words on the page carried more weight than gold. For the first time in years, I felt like my life was shifting in my favor. My heart beat so fast I thought I might burst. Every part of me wanted to shout it out, to call someone, anyone, and tell them that all the doubt, all the rejection had finally been worth it. But instead of running with excitement, I forced myself to be still. I thought of Athena and her sharp eyes that always searched for weakness. I thought of Caspian, who had long since chosen silence over support. I thought of Daphne, who would have mocked me no matter what success I found. Telling them would only give them time to twist my joy into something sour. They would sneer, pretend not to care, or worse, use it against me. That was the moment I knew the victory would be sweeter if I kept it secret. I signed the contract without hesitation. The ink flowed across the page like freedom itself. After sealing it, I slipped the letter into a diary I kept locked in my drawer. Nobody touched that book, not even Caspian, because he had long stopped paying attention to anything that wasn't about him or his family. Hiding it gave me a rush of safety, as though I had just tucked away a hidden treasure. The days that followed became a strange game of pretending. I went about my usual chores, served my hours at Bella Sera, and smiled when required. All the while, I carried a secret that filled me with strength. Each morning, I woke up knowing I had something none of them could take from me. They might still treat me like an outsider, but deep inside, I had already stepped into another life. That week, their behavior began to shift. Athena suddenly spoke with fake sweetness, asking about my schedule and whether I had plans for my birthday. Daphne dropped hints about a surprise, her smirk barely hidden. Even Caspian seemed nervous, pacing more often and checking his phone. I watched them closely, hiding my curiosity. It was almost amusing to see them put effort into this charade, as though I didn't notice the tension in their eyes. When they told me we would be having a grand dinner at one of the most expensive places in town, I acted touched. I pretended to be confused at their sudden generosity, as though I couldn't believe they would spend such money just for me. Inside, I knew better. Their kindness had strings. Something was waiting for me at that dinner, and they were eager to see how I'd react. But I was no longer the woman they thought they could humiliate. Each time Athena gave me one of her sly looks, I reminded myself of the envelope locked away upstairs. Each time Daphne made a smug remark, I let it roll off me because I had already won a bigger prize. And each time Caspian avoided my eyes, I felt more certain that the bond between us was already broken. Keeping quiet became my shield. The silence was not weakness, it was strategy. By saying nothing, I kept control. I wanted them to believe they still held the power, so that when the truth came out, it would hit harder than they ever imagined. As the night of the dinner approached, I held my composure. They were preparing a stage for my humiliation, but what they didn't know was that I had been building a stage of my own. My silence gave me the advantage, and I carried it like armor. I was ready for whatever came, because this time, the ending would belong to me. The evening of the dinner felt unreal from the start. Athena had chosen La Perla, a place so grand that every corner gleamed with wealth. The chandeliers sparkled, and the staff moved with rehearsed elegance. Guests arrived in tailored suits and gowns, and I felt eyes turn as we walked in. I wore my best dress, not the newest or the fanciest, but the one that made me feel composed. My heart beat hard in my chest, though not from nerves. Something inside me buzzed with quiet strength. Athena led the way like royalty, her chin lifted as though she owned the restaurant. Daphne trailed behind with her smug grin, whispering into her phone between glances at me. Caspian walked close but avoided my gaze, fiddling with his cufflinks and pretending everything was normal. They were staging a performance, and I was supposed to play the fool. We were seated at a long table dressed with silverware that shone under the light. The waiters served wine, and Athena raised her glass with exaggerated charm. "To family," she said. Her eyes flicked toward me, cold beneath the smile. I returned the toast with a calm face, though inside I wondered how far she would go tonight. The conversation was full of false sweetness. Athena complimented me on my dress but followed it with, "It's lovely to see you put in effort for once." Daphne chimed in with stories that always ended with her achievements, never missing a chance to point out how fortunate she was compared to others. Caspian hardly spoke. Instead, he kept glancing at the phone he had placed carefully against a glass, adjusting it every few minutes as though it was the most important thing in the world. The food arrived in courses, each plate more extravagant than the last. Yet the meal tasted strange to me. I ate politely, but my focus stayed sharp. Every smile, every word, felt like part of a script they had rehearsed. I played along, nodding, laughing softly when required, waiting for the moment that I knew was coming. The tension rose as dessert was mentioned. The waiters dimmed the lights slightly, and a cake appeared, carried with ceremony. Candles flickered, and the room filled with the familiar song. People at other tables turned to watch, their polite claps echoing as if this was a joyous family moment. To them, it looked like a celebration. To me, it felt like the air before a storm. I blew out the candles, smiling just enough for the crowd, and thanked them with quiet words. Then Athena made her move. With deliberate grace, she pulled out a gold-trimmed envelope, the same one I had seen days earlier. Her hand rested on it, as though she held a crown she was about to bestow. She paused long enough to make sure all eyes were on us. Caspian leaned forward slightly, his phone recording everything. Daphne's grin widened, her eyes glowing with expectation. Athena slid the envelope toward me, her voice smooth but sharp underneath. "From all of us, to mark a new chapter in your life." The way she said it was almost theatrical, like she was delivering a punchline. I took it with steady hands, though I already knew it wasn't meant as a gift. The room hushed, curious to see what treasure I was being given. In that moment, I kept my composure. Their performance was reaching its peak, but they had no idea I was not the same woman they thought I was. As the envelope rested in my hands, I felt the stage they had built for my downfall. What they didn't know was that I had prepared my own act, and my timing would be perfect. Tonight would not end the way they planned. My stomach dropped and my mouth went dry. For a few seconds, I couldn't focus on anything but the hollow sound of my own breath. Around us, people waited, curious and polite. I felt exposed, like someone had pulled back a curtain and left me standing on a stage I hadn't chosen to be on. A rush of heat moved through me, anger, shame, and a sharp, clear clarity all at once. My first thought was not about them. It was about myself. I would not give them the satisfaction of seeing me unravel. Years of small cruelties had taught me how to steady my hands. Now that same hard lesson helped me keep my face calm. I breathed slowly, counting in my head, just enough to keep control. I looked at each person at the table in turn, not with pleading, but with a new kind of understanding. The smiles around me were thin, practiced. The people who had shuffled closer to watch wanted a show. I could be their spectacle, or I could refuse. That choice felt like power I had forgotten I still had. Instead of crying, I set the paper down and folded my hands on the table. My voice stayed even when I spoke. I thanked them for the evening and for the effort they'd gone to. The words felt small and ordinary, and that was the point. I would not feed their drama with an emotional reaction. Their plan relied on spectacle. I gave them calm. As the room buzzed with whispers, I felt a curious lightness. The thing they had brought into the open, the thing meant to humiliate, suddenly felt less sharp, almost unreal. Maybe it was because I had been preparing for this in secret, or maybe because I'd already made decisions they didn't know about. Either way, the moment that should have crushed me made me notice what really mattered. My future, not their approval. People nearby shifted in their seats, exchanging looks. Some faces showed pity, others amusement. I caught the eye of a server who glanced toward our table, then away. He probably thought it was just another family drama. That was fine. Let them think what they wanted. I had stopped asking the world to validate me. When the talking rose, I kept listening. I could hear the small lies and jokes meant to make me look foolish. I could hear the quiet satisfaction in certain voices. It might have stung before, but now it felt like background noise. I had decided in that instant to move forward without arguing or defending. Arguments would only tie me to them longer. I made a decision about what to do next. I would leave with my head up. Not in a rush or a storming exit, but with steady steps and dignity. I asked for my coat, gathered my things, and walked out calmly while they watched. The walk to the door felt strange and freeing. Each step put distance between me and their version of me. Outside, cool air hit my face, and I finally let out a breath that had held too long. I didn't call anyone. I didn't text. I simply walked to the car and sat for a moment, thinking. There was no dramatic scene, no shouting match, no tearful apology. There was only a quiet choice to leave a place that had tried to define me. By the time I reached home, my anger had settled into a steady resolve. I opened the drawer where I kept private things and checked the papers I had tucked away. Seeing that proof, the small evidence of my plans, felt like a compass. It reminded me that I had options, pathways that did not depend on other people's approval. That night, I slept with the window cracked and the city noises in the background. I felt lighter. The humiliation they planned had not broken me. Instead, it pushed me toward the thing I had been working for in secret. Their attempt to shame me had shown me clearly what I no longer wanted to be part of. I had lost nothing I needed, and I had everything I wanted, the quiet strength to build a life of my own. The silence that followed was almost louder than their laughter had been earlier. Forks stopped halfway to mouths, glasses paused in midair. The air in that elegant dining room seemed to hold its breath with me. I watched their faces, the way their smug certainty drained away second by second. Athena's lips twitched, as though she couldn't decide whether to smile or scowl. Caspian blinked at me like he was trying to understand a language he had never heard. Daphne's grin collapsed into a tight line, her jaw set in irritation. I sat up straighter, keeping my composure as though I had expected this exact moment all along. The calm inside me didn't feel forced, it felt earned. Every sharp comment, every humiliating moment, every time I had been pushed into a corner, it all led to this. Instead of shrinking, I felt taller, stronger, freer. They had planned a scene of destruction, but I had turned it into a declaration. Athena finally leaned closer, whispering just loud enough for me to hear. "You think you're clever, don't you?" Her eyes were cold, but there was something else there now, hesitation. I didn't answer her. I didn't need to. The signature on those pages was my answer. My decision was final, and she couldn't twist it to her advantage anymore. Caspian looked nervous, his phone still recording but trembling slightly in his hand. He had wanted a video of my breakdown, something to watch later, maybe even share. Now he only had a clip of me taking back control, and he didn't know what to do with it. For the first time in years, I felt the balance shift. The power that had always been in their hands now sat squarely in mine. I calmly picked up my glass of water, took a slow sip, and set it down again. The small action felt like punctuation, a full stop on their performance. Around us, diners who had been pretending not to watch leaned closer, their curiosity painted on their faces. They had expected a scene too, but instead they were witnessing something different. An ending that wasn't dramatic, but sharp and undeniable. When the waiter approached, asking politely if everything was all right, I smiled at him and said, "Perfect, thank you." My words were casual, but the look on Athena's face was priceless. She had no script for this, no prepared comeback. For once, she wasn't in control of the room. I placed my napkin gently on the table and stood. "Enjoy the rest of your evening," I said evenly, meeting each of their eyes one by one. None of them spoke. Caspian's mouth opened, then closed again. Daphne fidgeted with her phone, trying to mask her discomfort. Athena stayed perfectly still, her expression unreadable, but I knew she was already scrambling in her mind for a way to fix what had just slipped through her fingers. Walking out of that restaurant felt like stepping into fresh air after being locked in a stifling room. My heels clicked against the polished floor, each sound echoing louder than any insult they had ever thrown at me. I didn't rush. I didn't look back. My calmness was my victory, my refusal to let them see me crumble. Outside, the city lights glowed, alive and bright, as though the world had been waiting for me to step into it on my own terms. The night air touched my skin coolly, and with every breath, the weight I had carried for years seemed to dissolve. They thought they had handed me an ending. What they didn't know was that I had already begun writing the beginning of something better. Their carefully staged betrayal had ended not in my downfall, but in their confusion. And that was sweeter than any toast or celebration they could have planned. Their eyes darted to the envelope in my hand, like it was a weapon they hadn't prepared for. Athena leaned forward, squinting as if she needed proof her control had just slipped away. Caspian froze, his phone lowering inch by inch until it was back on the table. Daphne's smirk fell completely, leaving her mouth slightly open. I slid the letter across the white tablecloth with deliberate calm. The Grandeur Hotel emblem gleamed in the soft light. "This is official," I said quietly but firmly. "A career, a home, and a life that doesn't need your approval." My words settled into the silence like stones dropped in still water. Athena's lips parted, but no sound came. For years, she had been the one pulling strings, orchestrating humiliations, ensuring I never felt enough. Now, one piece of paper had flipped her script. She blinked at it, but her polished composure cracked. Caspian finally spoke, his voice weak. "You didn't tell me." His eyes darted between me and the letter, as if the reality might change if he looked hard enough. He had wanted me dependent, trapped. But now he looked like a man who realized he had been left behind. I tilted my head slightly, keeping my tone even. "I didn't need to tell you. You wouldn't have listened anyway." His face paled, and he dropped his gaze. Daphne shifted uncomfortably, tapping her nails against her phone, pretending not to care, but her silence told the truth. She thrived on my insecurities, but there was nothing left to mock. I had rewritten the story they wanted to trap me in. Around us, diners leaned in closer, pretending to sip their drinks, pretending not to stare. But I didn't mind. If they wanted to watch, let them watch. I had nothing to hide anymore. Athena finally found her voice. "So you think a job makes you better than us?" she asked, her words dripping with bitterness. I smiled faintly. "No, Athena. It doesn't make me better. It makes me free." That word, free, hung in the air longer than anything else. It was heavier than their mockery, sharper than their schemes. For once, it was me controlling the room. I carefully tucked the offer letter back into my clutch, then tapped the divorce papers lying in front of me. "You thought this was a punishment, but it's a gift. You've given me a clean break exactly when I needed it." My voice didn't waver. It carried the finality of someone who had already stepped onto a new path. Athena's hands clenched against the tablecloth. Caspian looked away, ashamed. Daphne muttered something under her breath, but it didn't matter. None of it mattered anymore. I stood slowly, adjusting my dress as though nothing unusual had happened. My calm presence made their silence even heavier. "I'll send someone to collect my things tomorrow," I said. "After that, you won't hear from me again." The hush that followed was filled with their defeat. They had staged my downfall, but I had turned it into my liberation. Each step I took toward the exit echoed louder than their whispers. As I reached the door, I didn't look back. They had lost their power over me, and they knew it. What was meant to break me had become the very thing that set me free. The moment I pushed back my chair, every sound in the room seemed sharper. The clink of cutlery, the soft shuffle of waiters, even the hushed whispers from nearby tables. None of it touched me. I felt lighter than I had in years. The papers on the table no longer felt like a threat. They were just scraps of paper, nothing more. Athena's glare tried to pierce me, but it had lost its sting. For so long, I had let her words cut deep, but standing there, I realized she was powerless. Caspian sat frozen, the phone that once captured my humiliation now lying useless beside his untouched glass of wine. Daphne looked away, her expression pale and uneasy, no longer the bold voice of mockery she had always been. As I walked toward the exit, a few strangers gave me small nods, some even smiling faintly like they understood. Their quiet support felt like a shield around me, something no amount of cruelty from the Thorne family could ever erase. Outside, the night air wrapped around me, cool and fresh. I took a deep breath, letting it fill me with strength. For the first time in years, my future wasn't tied to pleasing anyone else. I had choices, real choices, built by my own effort. The hotel job wasn't just employment. It was a doorway into a new chapter where I didn't have to shrink myself to fit in. I pictured myself in the new apartment, arranging furniture, walking through a lobby where my name and work would be respected. No more judgmental glances at family dinners. No more feeling like I didn't belong. I was stepping into a place where I did belong, because I created it for myself. I didn't need to turn back to know what I had left behind. A family built on control, a marriage built on silence, a house filled with constant judgment. None of that had space in the life I was walking toward. As I headed down the quiet street, I whispered to myself, "This is only the beginning." And I believed it. My greatest revenge wasn't loud or messy. It was simply living free, on my own terms, without a trace of the chains they once tried to keep around me. Do you think I made the right choice by walking away from Athena, Caspian, and Daphne that night, or should I have stayed and tried to fix things with them? Let me know what you think in the comments. I'd love to hear your thoughts. And if you enjoy stories like this, don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss the next one.